The blood hit the parchment, and it screamed light, not red light, not any color with a name. Silver and gold tearing up through a sleeping man's veins, while a dozen hooded figures stood against the wall and did not breathe. Because they had stopped needing to centuries ago. 3 weeks earlier, she was carrying eggs. Grease on her apron. A diner floor she'd memorized crack by crack. She'd learned one rule down there. Don't lean wrong, or everything spills. Then a yellow notice on a dying woman's door. $83,000. A check with too many zeros. A photograph of a man who looked dead. He's not dead, the lawyer said. He's dying. His final wish is a wedding. Now she stands in a room where the candles don't flicker. A ring of cold gold on her finger, and across the altar, his eyes are starting to. 3 weeks ago, Ren Callahan was carrying eggs, plate in each hand, grease on her apron, the 6 a.m. rush at Hannigan's diner, which smelled like burnt coffee, and the specific kind of hope that arrives before dawn and leaves before breakfast is over. She knew every crack in that linoleum floor, had memorized the way booth 7 wobbled if you leaned wrong, had learned, early, not to lean wrong. That was her life. Careful, precise, don't lean wrong or everything spills. Now she was standing in a room that cost more than her mother's house, wearing a dress the color of dark wine, a thin circle of white gold resting on her forehead, like something out of a painting she'd never been allowed to touch. And somewhere in this mansion, this impossible, ridiculous, ancient mansion, a man with silver eyes was waiting for her to stop being afraid. I am not afraid, she told herself, which was the most obvious lie she had ever told. It started with a foreclosure notice taped to the front door of the house her mother had lived in for 31 years, yellow paper. Official font. The kind of document that doesn't apologize for existing. Ren had stood on that porch for a long time, just looking at it. The way you look at something that has already happened and cannot be unhappened. November cold biting through her jacket. The smell of her mother's garden. Dead now. Winter killed. Rising up from the frozen dirt, like a memory that hadn't gotten the message yet. $83,000. That was the number. That was what it cost to keep Margaret Ruth Callahan alive for 14 months. Treatments that didn't work. Treatments that almost worked. Treatments that the doctors described in careful, neutral language designed to prevent lawsuits while conveying the full weight of a verdict that had already been written. Stage 4. Palliative. Comfort care, which meant, we are out of options. We are trying not to say that directly. But we are out of options. Ren went inside and made dinner. Because what else do? You make dinner. You eat it with your mother, who can barely taste anything anymore, because the medication steals everything. The bitterness, the sweetness, the salt of things. You watch her try to pretend she's not in pain. You try to pretend you're not watching her pretend. And somewhere in the middle of that performance, between passing the bread and clearing the plates, you understand that love is sometimes just two people protecting each other from the same truth. At night, you sit at the kitchen table with the bills spread out like a losing hand of cards, and you do the math again. Even though you already know what the math says, it says not enough, not even close, not even in the same neighborhood as close. The lawyer arrived on a Tuesday, gray suit, wire-rimmed glasses, the kind of face that gave nothing away and had probably been giving nothing away for 30 years. He knocked on the door of Hannigan's diner at closing time, when Ren was wiping down tables and calculating whether she could stretch the electricity payment another week. He set a folder on the counter. Miss Callahan, not a question. I represent a private client. He has an unusual proposition. Unusual, Ren thought. Great, my favorite kind. She didn't say that, she said. I'm listening. The folder contained 3 things. A contract written in very small, very precise type that had clearly been drafted by someone who believed in covering every contingency. A check with more zeros than Ren had ever seen attached to her name. And a photograph. The photograph showed a man, pale, dark-haired, high cheekbones carved like something that belonged behind velvet ropes, eyes closed in what looked like sleep. Except the quality of his stillness was wrong. Too complete. Like a painting of sleep rather than the real thing. Like sleep that had been going on long enough to become something else. He looks dead, Ren thought. He's not dead, the lawyer said, as if he'd heard her. Ren looked up. He's dying, the lawyer continued. The doctors give him 72 hours. His final wish is a deathbed marriage, a legal ceremony, vows spoken, certificate signed. He nodded at the check, payment rendered, The marriage dissolves automatically upon his passing. No other obligations. No expectations beyond the ceremony itself. Ren stared at the check. $20,000. $20,000 would save her mother's house. Would cover 3 months of hospital bills. Would buy, not a cure, nothing bought a cure anymore, but time. Dignity. The difference between dying scared and dying with someone holding your hand in a room that didn't smell like despair. Why me? Ren asked. You were selected from a registry. The lawyer's expression didn't shift. Mr. Vane has very specific requirements. You meet them all, Mr. Vane. She looked at the photograph again. At that impossible face, what requirements? The lawyer paused, just briefly. That's above my pay grade, Miss Callahan, which was, Ren decided, the most unsatisfying answer she had ever received in a life that had given her significant competition for that title. She read the contract 3 times. Asked 4 questions the lawyer deflected with practiced efficiency. Sat in booth 7, the one that wobbled for a long time after he left. Listened to the diner settle into its closing time quiet, the hiss of the coffee machine cooling, the distant sound of traffic, the electricity bill waiting at home on the counter next to 2 other bills she couldn't pay. Then she signed. Not because she believed it. Not because it made sense. Not because signing a contract to marry a dying stranger was a reasonable decision by any metric she had ever used. Because the electricity company had sent a final notice that morning. Because her mother had tried to make oatmeal for breakfast and couldn't hold the spoon steady. Because $20,000 was the difference between drowning slowly and maybe, possibly, finding something solid to stand on. I'll regret this, she thought, signing her name, but I'll regret the alternative more. Room 1217. Hargrove Hospice. The 12th floor, the elevator was too slow. Ren had time to reconsider the entire decision approximately 6 times before the doors opened. Had time to imagine all the ways this could go wrong. Had time to remember that she was a 26-year-old waitress with community college credits she'd never finished on her way to marry a dying stranger home. For money. And that sentence should have sounded more alarming than it did. But here was the thing about desperation. It had a way of making the impossible seem practical. A woman was waiting in the corridor. Ancient. Elegant. Silver hair pulled back with a kind of architectural severity that took either a very good stylist or several centuries of practice. Dressed in black that cost more than Ren's car. Her eyes were pale gray. The color of winter sky just before it decides to snow on something you weren't prepared for. She looked at Ren the way certain people look at things they've been waiting for. Assessing. Calibrating. Finding the measurements of something she'd already decided was real. You're younger than I expected, the woman said. Her accent was European, old European, the kind that had lived in too many countries to belong to any one of them. The kind that belonged instead to a particular century. I'm 26, Ren said. Is that a problem? Something shifted in the woman's expression. Almost a smile. The kind that knows something you don't yet. No, child. It's exactly right. She stepped back from the door. I'm Lady Isadora. I've been with Caius for a very long time. A pause that carried the weight of centuries without trying. He's been waiting for you. In his way. Interesting qualifier. Ren filed it away. Ren walked in. The room was wrong. Not hospice wrong. Not sad and sterile wrong. Wrong. Heavy curtains blocked the afternoon sun. Candles burned in silver holders. 12 of them. 2 dozen. Their flames completely still in the climate-controlled air, as if they'd decided stillness was the appropriate response to the room they were in. The medical equipment had vanished. In its place, furniture that looked hand-carved. Dark wood. Old stone. Tapestries on the walls showing things Ren couldn't quite make out in the amber light, but felt certain she wasn't meant to understand on the first pass. And in the center of it all, on a bed that looked like it had been made for someone who had never once had ordinary sleep, lay the man from the photograph. Ren stopped moving. Because here was the thing the photograph hadn't captured. The photograph had shown his features, his stillness, the architectural precision of cheekbones and jaw, and the dark hair fallen across a pillow too ordinary for such a face. What the photograph hadn't shown was the presence, even unconscious, even supposedly dying. He occupied the room in a way that made the air feel different, heavier, like standing near something that generated its own gravity, like the room had reorganized itself around him and would reorganize again if he left. He's very still, Ren thought, and then, He's very. She stopped that thought before it finished. She was here for $20,000. She was here for her mother. She was not here to have thoughts that needed stopping. Is he sleeping? She asked. Because she needed to say something. In a manner of speaking, Lady Isadora moved to the bedside with a fluid grace that was slightly too smooth for a woman her apparent age. She gestured to a chair near the bed. Sit, child. There is much to discuss before the ceremony. Ren sat, kept her eyes on the man in the bed, on the slow, barely there rise and fall of his chest, on the flutter of pulse visible at his throat. Which was a strange thing to notice, the pulse of a stranger. In a room full of candles that weren't moving, "What's his name?" she asked. "Caius Vane." Lady Isadora's voice shifted, the name carrying weight, like a title and a history, and several centuries of complicated decisions all compressed into 2 syllables. He has borne others, across the centuries. Lord of the Nightborn Court. First of the ancient line, Ren waited. Keeper of the covenant between the living and the undying. Silence. "I'm sorry," Ren said carefully. The what? The next 10 minutes changed everything. Ren thought she knew about the world. Vampires were real. That was the headline. Everything else. The court, the covenant, the 1,000-year curse, the old laws written in blood and starlight, the high priestess who had been older than most kingdoms when she'd done what she'd done, was the fine print that kept unfolding after the headline landed and kept landing. Ren's first instinct was to leave. Her second instinct was to leave faster. She actually stood, actually backed toward the door. Her body making a decision her brain was still processing. "This is insane," she said. "This is some kind of... I don't know what this is, but Lady Isadora moved, not like a person moves. Like the word moves needed to be reconsidered entirely. One moment she was by the bed. The next she was between Ren and the exit, one hand gentle on Ren's shoulder. Not restraining, just present. The way a wall is present, not aggressive. Just definitively there. "You agreed to 2 hours, Lady Isadora said. Hear the rest." Ren's heart was doing something architectural and unhelpful inside her chest. You're actually, yes, and he's yes, and the contract is exactly what it says it is?" Lady Isadora's gray eyes were steady, unalarmed. The eyes of someone for whom this conversation was not in any way unusual. No more, no less. Everything was disclosed. Everything is your choice, your choice. Ren wanted to laugh. My choice was an interesting way to describe a situation she'd walked into wearing her only nice blouse and carrying debt that had its own gravitational field. She sat back down because $20,000. Because her mother. Because she needed to hear the rest, even if the rest was impossible. Which it clearly was. The curse was 1,000 years old. Lady Isadora told her the whole of it, in the measured voice of someone who had told this story before, but understood it needed to land completely each time. A millennium ago, Caius Vane had loved a human woman, had married her against the will of his court, against the explicit instruction of ancient and immortal peers who believed such a union was an insult to everything they'd spent centuries building. The court's high priestess, a creature older than most kingdoms, older than most concepts, had cursed him with the specific cruelty of someone who understood exactly what they were taking. "If you want a human bride so badly," the priestess had said, "then sleep. Sleep until another human woman agrees to marry you of her own free will, not for love, not for magic, for mortal reasons, for survival. Sleep until that woman says yes, knowing she will receive only mortal rewards. Sleep for 1,000 years, or until the curse breaks. Whichever comes first." He had slept, his first wife, the woman he had loved. The woman the whole thing had been about, had grown old and died while he was unconscious. A century gone, just like that. While he dreamed whatever cursed vampires dreamed, she had lived her entire remaining life without him and then died, and he'd never gotten to say goodbye to either. And then the years kept going. And Caius Vane kept sleeping. "The winter solstice arrives in 3 days, Lady Isadora said. If the curse is not broken before then, it completes its term. He will not wake again." Ren looked at the man in the bed, at the absolute stillness of him, at the loneliness that clung to his features even in unconscious sleep. Deep set, worn in, the kind of lonely that had been there so long, it had stopped feeling like a condition and started feeling like a characteristic. He looks like someone who waited too long for something, she thought, and then kept waiting anyway. What happens if I say the vows? She heard herself ask. Lady Isadora's expression was careful. Precise. The curse breaks. Caius wakes. You become bound to him by the laws of our kind, wife and queen consort, for a term of 1,000 years, unless death or mutual dissolution frees you both. Ren processed this. I'd be dead in 60 years, she said. If I'm lucky. Lady Isadora said nothing, which was, Ren realized, its own kind of answer. The loudest kind. The contract says immortality, Ren said slowly. I thought that was legal language. Metaphorical. It is not metaphorical. You're saying I'd become one of us? Yes, Lady Isadora held her gaze without flinching. On the first full moon following the vows, you would be transformed. The process is not painless. I won't deceive you about that, but it passes. And what you are afterward is worth what it cost to get there. The room was very quiet. The candle flames were perfectly still. Ren sat with the full weight of the word immortal. Tried to hold it. Couldn't. It was too large. She tried to imagine being 30, 40, 200, 800. Tried to imagine watching everyone she knew grow old and disappear while she stayed exactly as she was. Tried to imagine watching her mother, who had maybe 3 weeks left, who had bills Ren couldn't pay, who had spent 31 years giving everything she had to a daughter, who didn't know how to stop the one thing that was taking her away. $20,000 wasn't enough. Not nearly enough, but it was something. It was the specific difference between her mother dying with comfort around her and dying with nothing but the smell of antiseptic and the sound of a television no one was watching. What do I actually have to lose? The thought was quiet, level. The voice of someone who had done the math so many times the numbers had stopped being frightening and started being just numbers. What do I have that I'm protecting so carefully? I need to think, Ren said. You have 1 hour, Lady Isadora said. After that, the window closes. She moved toward the door. Paused with one hand on the frame. Didn't turn around. For what it's worth, she said. He chose you specifically. He reviewed hundreds of files. Considered dozens of candidates. Woke briefly to do it and then returned to the curse's hold. A beat. When he saw your photograph, he said you had eyes that had wept for others while you were still drowning yourself. Another beat. Queed at her, like she was setting something down carefully. He said you were exactly right. Then she was gone. And Ren was alone with the sleeping vampire king and the folder on the side table and the weight of a choice that didn't feel like a choice at all. She opened the folder. Her own face looked back at her dryer's license photo. 3 years old. Taken on a day when she still believed the trajectory of things could improve if you just kept moving. Beneath it, a dossier, everything. Her mother's diagnosis, Margaret Ruth Callahan. Stage 4 lymphoma, palliative care, estimated 6 to 8 weeks. Her debts. Her employment record, the diner's financials. Her 2 years of community college, incomplete. Her father's absence, noted without editorial comment, which was somehow worse. Her entire life reduced to columns and deficits and the spaces between them. She should have felt violated. She did feel violated, but something else. He did his homework, she thought. He didn't pick a name from a list. He read all of this, knew all of this, and he still, you said I was exactly right, Ren said aloud to the unconscious man. Her voice sounded strange in the candlelit room. Too ordinary for the space. Right for what, exactly? No answer. The candles burned without moving. She moved to the bedside, closer now. Close enough to see the details the photograph hadn't captured. The faint lines at the corners of his eyes, earned over centuries instead of decades, which meant something different when you thought about it. The way his hands rested on his chest, fingers long and completely still. The dark hair across the pillow. The eyelashes casting delicate shadows on cheekbones that had no business being that precise even like this. Even unconscious and supposedly moments from permanent death. He was the most present person she'd ever stood near. That doesn't make sense, she thought. Presence isn't something unconscious people have, except he does. She looked at his face for a long time. Looking for cruelty and not finding it. Looking for arrogance and finding, instead, something that might have been, a very long time ago, before 1,000 years of sleeping, hope. The memory of hope. The shape that hope leaves behind after it's been held so long it becomes part of the structure. You chose me, she said quietly. Because I'd understand, didn't you? Because you looked at my file and you saw someone who was going to make the impossible choice. Because desperate people do desperate things. She paused. Or maybe because you saw someone who was already drowning and figured they had less to lose than most. The candle nearest the bed flickered. No breeze in the room. No movement. just a flicker and then steady again. Ren watched it settle. Then she picked up the contract, read it again. All the way through this time without looking for the exit. Read the clause about immortality, and the clause about the transformation, and the clause about mutual dissolution. Read the old-fashioned language about covenant and binding, and the laws that predated every legal system she'd ever learned about in the 2 years of college she hadn't finished. And this time, when she reached the end, her hands weren't shaking. Lady Isadora returned at precisely the 59-minute mark. Ren was still sitting beside the bed, not doing anything. Just being in the room with the decision she'd already made and hadn't acknowledged yet. "Have you decided, child?" Ren looked up. "Before I answer, tell me something. What was Caius like before the curse? What kind of man is he? Not the title. The person." Lady Isadora was quiet for a moment, not calculating, choosing. The difference mattered, and Ren was learning to read it. "Lonely," she said finally. "Honorable to a fault. He has carried the weight of this court for longer than most nations have existed, and he has never once put that weight down and walked away from it, even when he should have." She looked at the man in the bed with an expression that had centuries of complicated affection in it. "He has forgotten how to be anything but king. Forgotten that even the immortal need someone. Not a subject. Not a political arrangement, a pause. Someone who sees them. Just them. Without the crown in the way." Ren thought about that word. "Sees. He thinks this marriage is purely transactional," Lady Isadora added. "He expects nothing beyond the contract terms. He will honor every obligation and maintain every appropriate distance and be courteous and correct at every turn." She looked at Ren steadily. "He is very good at appropriate distance. That sounds lonely," Ren said. "Yes," Lady Isadora agreed, simply. "It does." Ren stood. Set the contract back on the side table. Looked at Caius Vane one more time, at the loneliness carved so deep into his sleeping face it had become part of the architecture. "This is insane," she thought. "This is genuinely, completely, unambiguously insane." But insane stopped being a deal-breaker around the time the electricity notice arrived. "Yes," Ren said. "I'll marry him." The ceremony happened at midnight. Ren had expected something that looked like a courthouse. Paperwork, a witness. 10 uncomfortable minutes and a signature. What she got was something out of a Gothic novel written by someone who had no concept of restraint and an unlimited budget for candles. The hospice room had been transformed. Black marble altar veined with silver, which had appeared from somewhere Ren chose not to think about. Candles in concentric circles, their flames throwing amber light across walls, now hung with dark blue silk that rippled occasionally, despite the absence of any wind. The medical equipment was gone, replaced by furniture that looked older than the country Ren lived in. And the witnesses. A dozen figures in dark hoods ranged along the walls. Utterly still. The kind of still that reminded Ren of the man in the bed. Too complete, too deliberate. The stillness of things that had stopped needing to pretend at movement. She was wearing a different dress. Deep burgundy velvet that fit her perfectly, which was impossible since no one had taken measurements, but was, at this point, no longer in the top 10 most impossible things about her evening. The neckline was modest, the sleeves long. For she looked, when she caught her reflection in the hallway mirror, like someone who belonged in oil paintings and conversations about legacy. "You look like a queen," Lady Isadora had said, adjusting the last pin with cool, efficient fingers. "I look like I'm about to do something I cannot undo," Ren had thought, which were, technically, the same statement. 2 vampires she hadn't met carried Caius to the altar. Moving with careful reverence, the way people move when they are carrying something that has survived 1,000 years of impossible odds, and they are aware acutely of that fact. They positioned him between them so he appeared to stand, supported, held, but upright. His eyes were still closed, his chest barely moved. "I'm about to marry an unconscious man," Ren thought, in front of a group of hooded immortals, at midnight, in a hospice that has been redecorated to look like a scene from a novel I would never have chosen. No part of this is normal. No part of this was ever going to be normal. Lady Isadora took her position at the altar's head. The hooded figures formed their semicircle. The candles pulsed, once, twice, in a rhythm that matched Ren's heartbeat with an accuracy she found deeply, specifically, unsettling. "We gather under the dark moon's favor," Lady Isadora began, her voice dropping into a register that made the air vibrate at a frequency Ren felt in her back teeth, "to witness the forging of a bond older than crowns. To see two souls joined by the old laws. By choice. Freely given. She looked at Ren. Do you, Ren Callahan, come to this covenant willingly, without coercion or enchantment? I do. Ren's voice didn't shake. She counted that as a personal achievement. Do you accept the terms as written? The transformation. The responsibilities. The 1,000 years of binding? 1,000 years. The words were enormous. She let them be enormous. She didn't try to make them smaller or more manageable. Some things deserve to be exactly the size they were. I do. Do you take Caius Vane as your husband, your king, your partner in all things until death or dissolution frees you both? Ren looked at the man being held upright between two ancient vampires, at his still face, at the loneliness carved into his features even now, even here, even with the ceremony happening around him. She thought about a woman who'd grown old while he slept. About 1,000 years of waiting for exactly this moment to arrive. About what it cost to wait that long for something you couldn't be certain was coming. I do, she said. Lady Isadora turned to Caius. One of the vampires leaned close, whispered something in a language that sounded like wind moving through a dead forest in a country that no longer existed. Then, impossibly, Caius's lips moved. The words were barely sound. Ancient syllables that Ren felt rather than heard, like a vibration in the floor beneath her feet. Like the room itself was agreeing to something, he consents, Lady Isadora said. Speaks the vows in the old way, as is his right. She produced a piece of parchment that looked like it had been old when America was young and had decided to stay that way. Both of you, place your hands upon the covenant. Ren laid her right hand flat on the document. The vampires guided Caius's hand beside hers. His skin was cool. Not cold, not unpleasant, but cool, the way marble feels when a room has been kept in shadow for longer than anyone remembers. And touching it, Ren felt something she couldn't explain and didn't try to. A current. Not electricity. Something older than electricity. Something that had a name in a language she hadn't learned yet. Recognition, she thought, which made no sense at all. Lady Isadora produced a small ceremonial knife. Ornate. Old. The kind of object that had been made for exactly this purpose and had been waiting patiently to fulfill it. The old laws require blood to seal what words begin, a quick, precise prick. Pain bloomed sharp and brief and specific. A dark bead welled at Ren's fingertip. Lady Isadora guided her hand over the parchment. The blood fell, sizzled where it landed. Not with heat. With something that had no name in any language Ren knew. Then Caius's hand, another prick. His blood was darker, almost black in the candlelight. When it hit the parchment, the document flared, silver, gold, thud, colors that didn't belong to any spectrum she'd learned about. The hooded witnesses inhaled collectively. One sound. Like wind through a canyon. Like something that had been holding its breath for a very long time finally releasing. The light spread from the contract to their joined hands. Traveled up Ren's arm in traceries that felt like lightning made patient. Made careful. Made deliberate. She couldn't move, didn't want to, could only watch as the light wrapped around both of them. Winding between their fingers, following the lines of their joined hands like it had been waiting for exactly this configuration, and was relieved, after 1,000 years, to finally find it. By blood given and vows spoken, Lady Isadora's voice rose above the light's low hum. By the old laws witnessed and the dark moon's blessing, I pronounce you bound, husband and wife, king and consort. Let no law of man or immortal break what is joined here. The light detonated. Ren cried out, not in pain, in shock. The way you cry out when you dive into cold water. That total body recalibration. Every sense retuned simultaneously. She could feel the candle flame's heat from across the room, precise and distinct. Could hear the heartbeats of the hooded witnesses, each one a different rhythm. Could smell the stone of the altar, centuries of incense worked into its grain, and beneath that, something older. The mineral smell of time itself, and in her chest, a second heartbeat, not hers, steady, slow, ancient, like a clock that had been running since before anyone alive could remember. Like something that had been waiting to be heard. Ren staggered. Lady Isadora caught her with hands that were steady and cool and completely unsurprised. Peace, she said quietly. The bond is strong. You'll adjust, but Ren barely heard her, because across the altar the two vampires were stepping back, and Caius Vane was standing on his own. He was taller than she'd expected, which was, she acknowledged, an absurd thing to notice first. She'd seen him lying down. Height hadn't registered, but standing, he was tall and broad through the shoulders, And the presence that had filled the room while he was unconscious was, now that he was awake, something else entirely. Not larger exactly, denser, more concentrated. Like the difference between a photograph of fire and an actual fire in the room with you. He stood without needing support. Just stood, power settling through him like water finding its level after a long time of being disturbed. His eyes opened slowly. Silver. True silver. Metallic and precise, catching every point of candlelight at once in a way that made them look lit from the inside. They found Ren's face immediately, with an accuracy that had nothing to do with looking around the room first, as if he'd known exactly where she was before he opened his eyes, as if he'd always known. He looked at her for a long moment, something moving through his expression that she couldn't catalog. Wonder, maybe. The careful, guarded kind. The kind that had been disappointed enough times to approach its own hope sideways and at an angle. You came, he said. His voice was low, resonant. It carried traces of a dozen different accents the way old wood carries traces of a dozen different weathers, all present, all real, all part of the same grain. I signed a contract, Ren said. Something crossed his face. There and gone before she could name it. Yes, he said. Of course. The contract. He looked down at their hands, still resting on the altar, close but no longer touching. At the ring that had appeared on Ren's finger during the ceremony, moonstones set in white gold, impossibly delicate, catching light and doing something complicated with it that Ren didn't have the vocabulary to describe yet. He looked back at her. His expression had settled into something careful and neutral and practiced. Thank you, he said formally, for what you've done, for breaking the curse. You'll be fully compensated. All terms will be honored. You'll be fully compensated. Like she'd filed paperwork. Like she'd submitted an invoice for services rendered. Ren told herself it didn't sting. It was a transaction. She'd known that walking in. She'd signed a contract that said exactly that in the third paragraph. It stung anyway. You're welcome, she managed. He stepped back the proper distance, looked at her properly for the first time, and she saw his gaze move from her face to the burgundy dress and back, a thorough and completely neutral assessment. You're younger than I expected, he said. I'm 26, Ren said. Is that a problem? No. A pause that felt like he was finding his footing in a conversation he'd been having in his head for 1,000 years and was now discovering was different than the version in his head. You're different from what I imagined. Before Ren could ask what he had imagined, and she very much wanted to ask that. Lady Isadora materialized between them with the focused efficiency of a woman who had spent centuries managing exactly this kind of charged pause. The ceremony is complete, she announced. The witnesses confirm the bond's validity. She looked at Caius with the directness of someone who had known him long enough to be honest. How do you feel, my lord? Caius flexed his hands slowly, rolled his shoulders with the careful deliberateness of a man testing machinery that had been idle for a very long time. Restored, he said. The curse is broken. I can feel the old laws settling back into proper order. He looked at the assembled vampires. The hoods had come down now, faces visible, watching with expressions ranging from relief to calculation to something carefully blank. Return to the court. Report that Caius Vane lives. They filed out in silence. 12 pairs of ancient eyes tracking Ren as they passed, cataloging, measuring. Filing verdicts she couldn't read yet, then the doors closed. 3 of them left in the room, silence. The kind that has weight. Now, what? Ren asked. Caius looked at her. Silver eyes catching candlelight, his expression unreadable in a way that required practice to maintain. Now, he said, we go home. Home was a word that didn't survive contact with what Caius Vane lived in. The car ride had been quiet. Ren sitting in the back of a vehicle that cost more than her mother's house, watching city lights blur past, trying to process the fact that she could feel. In her chest, steady and strange and completely impossible. The presence of the man sitting on the other side of the seat. Like a second heartbeat that wasn't hers. Like a compass needle that had found something to point at. She kept her eyes on the window. He kept his eyes forward. The mansion materialized from darkness, like something that had always been there, and had simply been waiting for permission to be seen. Stone towers, leaded windows. Architecture that predated electricity by centuries and made absolutely no apologies for it. Grounds that looked tended by people who understood that beauty and control were not, in fact, the same thing, but had chosen control anyway. Inside was more of everything. Marble floors polished to the consistency of mirrors, tapestries along corridors that stretched into shadow, furniture that looked handmade by craftsmen who had been dead for 4 centuries and had spent their living years perfecting a single skill. And the silence, the absolute, architectural silence of spaces designed to be too large for the people inhabiting them. Lady Isadora led them through corridors that seemed to multiply. "East Wing," she said. "Your private quarters, my lady. My lady." 6 hours ago, Ren had been wiping down tables. The distance between those 2 sentences was not a distance that made emotional sense. The suite was larger than the apartment Ren shared with her mother. Bedroom with a canopy bed carved from dark wood, so old it had probably watched several dynasties rise and fall. Sitting room with bookshelves reaching the ceiling, packed with volumes she wanted to touch immediately. Bathroom with a tub that could reasonably fit 4 people. Everything beautiful. Everything expensive. Everything feeling slightly wrong the way museum exhibits feel wrong. You can see them, you can be near them, but you understand without being told that you are not supposed to leave fingerprints. "The full moon is 28 days hence," Lady Isadora said. "Until then, you remain human. You'll eat, sleep, exist as you always have." A pause that contained something careful. "We ask only that you remain on the grounds. For your safety." "Whose safety?" Ren asked. "Yours," Caius's voice from the doorway. She hadn't heard him follow. She turned. He stood in the frame, watching her with those silver eyes. He'd changed clothes with an efficiency she couldn't account for. Dark trousers, a shirt the color of charcoal. Simple, perfectly fitted, like everything in this house. "The court will need time to accept a human queen consort. Not all will be pleased. Some will see you as weakness, as vulnerability. Until the transformation completes, you could be hurt, so I'm a prisoner, a guest," he said. "With temporary limitations." Ren looked around the beautiful room, the empty wardrobes waiting to be filled, the unfamiliar luxury pressing in from every direction, the silence that felt less like peace and more like the absence of everything she recognized. She'd signed a contract. The money had been transferred. She'd seen the confirmation on her phone in the car. Her mother's hospital bills were being handled. The foreclosure notice had been rescinded. She had done what she had gone there to do. She'd sold her freedom fair and square. "Fine," she said. Lady Isadora showed her the bell pull by the door, explained the household with brisk efficiency, and swept out with the grace of someone who had been managing exactly this kind of situation for longer than Ren had been alive. Longer than anyone currently alive had been alive. Ren and Caius were alone. The silence was different now, more specific. The particular quality of 2 people in a room who are both aware of the other and both pretending not to be. He stood near the fireplace. Burning, she noticed, despite the fact that it hadn't been burning when they'd arrived. Magic, probably. She had stopped being surprised by magic approximately 45 minutes ago. His hand rested on the mantel. He was looking into the flames with the focused attention of someone who was not, in fact, seeing them. "You don't have to stay," Ren said quietly. "I know what this is. A contract. You don't have to perform something it isn't." His hand tightened on the marble, barely. She noticed anyway. "I'm not performing," he said. "You're my wife, my consort. There are responsibilities." "Not tonight." The firmness surprised her. But she meant it. "Tonight I need to process the fact that I married an immortal vampire king in a midnight ceremony involving blood and ancient law, and I can feel your heartbeat in my chest." Which is insane. "So tonight I need to be alone with that." Something crossed his expression, too fast to name. He nodded once. "As you wish." He moved toward the door, stopped, turned back. His silver eyes had gone softer in the firelight, less metallic, more like moonlight on still water rather than polished coin. "I know this wasn't what you would have chosen. You're here for your mother. Not for me." A pause that felt honest. "But I swear on the old laws, I will honor every term. You'll be protected, provided for. You'll want for nothing material." It was meant to be reassuring. It landed like a door closing. "Thank you," Ren whispered. He left. The click of the door was quiet and final. Ren stood in the center of her beautiful temporary prison, surrounded by wealth she'd never imagined having, wearing a dress that cost more than a month of her life. The moonstone ring catching firelight and refusing to behave like ordinary stone, and in her chest, that second heartbeat, moving away now, through the walls of the mansion, giving her well, she thought. Here we are. She moved to the window. The grounds stretched below, fountains, pathways, Gardens shaped by hands that knew exactly what they were doing and had been doing it for centuries. In the distance, figures moved. Vampires. Ancient immortals going about their ancient immortals' business, indifferent to the 26-year-old human woman who had just joined their world by signing a contract in a diner booth that wobbled. She pressed her forehead against the cool glass. You chose me, she thought. Because I'd understand sacrifice. Because you saw someone desperate enough to say yes to the impossible. But there's something else here. Something in that room you're not telling me. She changed into the nightgown someone had left folded on the bed. Silk, of course. Climbed into the enormous bed and lay looking up at the canopy, found the second heartbeat in her chest, followed it, slow and steady and ancient, somewhere deep in the house, giving her space, keeping his distance. Being courteous and correct and appropriate. The portrait, she thought, just before sleep. The locked room in the east wing. The portrait facing the wall. That isn't in any contract, and tomorrow I'm going to find out what it means. The court gathered at noon. Ren had faced difficult rooms before. The bank manager who'd explained, with professional sympathy, that there were no remaining options. The doctor who'd said palliative in that careful, neutral voice designed to convey without stating. The diner's owner who'd apologized while cutting her hours. She knew what it felt like to stand in a room where the verdict had already been written, and she was just there to receive it. This was different. This was 200 immortals deciding, all at once, whether she had the right to exist in their world. Lady Isadora had spent 2 hours preparing her. The dress was deep emerald silk, silver embroidery at the hem and cuffs in patterns that meant things Ren didn't have the vocabulary for yet. A circlet of white gold, earrings set with stones that caught light and held it. The transformation was complete enough that when Ren looked in the mirror, she saw someone who might, conceivably, belong in the room she was about to walk into. You look ridiculous, Ren said. You look like a queen, Lady Isadora said, which is the point. Those aren't the same thing. In this court they are. Lady Isadora met her eyes in the mirror with the directness of someone who had no time for comfortable lies. They will test you. They will ask questions designed to trap. They will watch for fear the way hunters watch for movement. I'm terrified, then be terrified behind your teeth, flat. Certain, no softening. You broke a 1,000-year curse that none of them could break. That is not nothing. Don't let them convince you it is. Ren looked at herself one more time. A woman in a dress that fit too perfectly, in a house she hadn't chosen, married to a man she'd known for 11 hours, terrified behind your teeth. I can do that. The throne room was designed to make people feel small. Vaulted ceilings that disappeared into the shadow before they reached their conclusion. Walls lined with tapestries depicting battles and coronations, and the kind of history that never made it into textbooks because it didn't fit any framework the writers had available. Black stone floors polished to the consistency of mirrors. Chandeliers holding 1,000 flames that illuminated everything and cast shadows that seemed deliberately placed. And everywhere, vampires, dozens, maybe hundreds. Clustered along the walls in groups, Ren couldn't decode yet. Alliances and houses and loyalties compressed into proximity and posture, into the specific distances people kept from each other when they had centuries of complicated history between them. All of them turned when the doors opened. All of them went silent. Ren's heels clicked on the stone. Too loud. Each step an announcement she hadn't prepared. She kept her chin up, kept her gaze forward, kept walking. Don't lean wrong, she thought. Or everything spills, at the far end, on a dais flanked by black stone columns, 2 thrones, and before the thrones, Caius standing, not sitting. Dressed in formal black with silver embroidery that matched her own, planned, she realized. Deliberate, visual evidence of a unified front she hadn't been consulted about, but which was, she had to admit, effective. High collar. No crown. He didn't need one. Power didn't need announcement. It was just a property of his presence. The way mass was a property of matter, his silver eyes found her the moment she entered. Something moved in them. There and gone, she reached the dais. Lady Isadora stepped back. Caius descended 2 steps, extended his hand. His skin was cool and steady. The bond in her chest flared warm when their hands met. Just briefly, just enough. Stop that, she told it. Together they climbed to the thrones. Ren sat, fought the urge to adjust the circlet. The crown sat on her head like a constant reminder of everything she didn't know yet. Caius stood before the assembled court, and his voice filled the space without effort, without performance, without any of the work that filling that space should have required. Members of the Nightborn Court, witnesses to the old laws, I present to you Ren Callahan Vane, my wife and queen consort, she who broke the curse that bound me for 10 centuries. She who entered the covenant willingly and will stand beside me for 1,000 years. The murmur that went through the room was complex. Not approval, not dissent. The sound of very old, very intelligent creatures recalibrating around new information. They hadn't expected to have to process today. Then a figure stepped forward from the crowd, male. Ancient in a way that showed not in his face, which was ageless in the way of old paintings, but in the set of his shoulders. In the way he occupied space with the complete assurance of a man who had never once been told he couldn't. White hair pulled back, eyes the pale blue of something that had stopped being warm a very long time ago and had made peace with that. Lord Aldrich, Lady Isadora had briefed her in clipped, careful sentences. Caius's oldest advisor. 800 years in service to this court. Believes stability is the supreme value. Watch his hands when he speaks. If they're still, he's already won the argument he's about to make. His hands were perfectly still, Your Majesty. His voice was smooth, formal. Courtesy like a very thin coating over something else. While we rejoice at your restoration, the court deserves clarification. What qualities does this human possess to warrant such elevation? Caius's expression didn't shift. She possesses my choice. That is explanation enough, Aldrich smiled. The smile of someone who had anticipated exactly that answer and was pleased it had arrived on schedule. Of course, sire. But the old laws specify that a queen consort must demonstrate strength, wisdom, the ability to withstand our nature. A pause weighted with implication. Has she been tested? Not yet, then perhaps she will be tested when the transformation completes. Flat. Final. The voice of someone who had ended conversations this way for centuries. As the contract stipulates, Aldrich's gaze moved, slowly, to Ren, not hostile, not dismissive. Something more precise than either. Assessing, she thought. Looking for a specific thing. A second vampire stepped forward before Ren could hold that thought. Female. Beautiful in the sculptural way of people who had had centuries to perfect every aspect of their presentation. Hair the color of old mahogany. Eyes like cut amber, if I may, Your Majesty. What value does your consort bring to this court? Beyond the breaking of the curse itself, the room was waiting. That held breath quality she could feel even through the bond's interference. 200 immortals waiting to see if the human would embarrass herself. Hoping, a few of them, that she would. Here we go, she thought, before Caius could answer. Before Lady Isadora could intervene. Before she could talk herself out of it. Ren spoke. I bring a mortal perspective. Her voice came out steady, which surprised her more than anything else that had happened in the last 12 hours. I grew up counting every dollar my mother made. I've watched bills arrive that couldn't be paid, and I've had to choose which ones mattered more. I've made decisions between bad and worse at a kitchen table at 2 a.m, alone with nobody to ask. She looked at the female vampire steadily. I understand what it costs to be fragile. To know that every day you have might be the last one. To feel time running through your hands and know you can't slow it down. She let her gaze move around the room. You've all lived so long you've forgotten what that feels like. What it does to a person. How it sharpens everything. Every choice, every conversation, every ordinary moment that you understand, because you've learned to understand it, is not ordinary at all. A pause. I haven't forgotten. And if I'm going to stand beside your king for centuries, maybe that's something this court could use. Someone who remembers what it costs to be mortal. Someone who won't take eternity for granted because she knows exactly what the alternative looks like. Silence. Then, from somewhere in the back of the room, not mockery. Something that sounded like a man revising an opinion he'd been confident in until 30 seconds ago. Aldrich inclined his head. Small. Precise. Perhaps there is more to you than first impressions suggest. His eyes were still doing that thing. Still looking for the specific thing. We shall see. He melted back into the crowd with the ease of someone who had been doing exactly this for 800 years. Ren exhaled through her nose. Behind the teeth, she thought. Behind the teeth. The formal presentation ended. Petitioners came forward with the practiced patience of people who had learned to wait. Minor matters, house disputes, requests for audience, a delegation from somewhere called the Southern Houses that made Caius's jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. He handled each one with the economy of centuries of practice, the right words, the right weight, the right silence. Ren watched him. She watched the way his eyes tracked the room, cataloging a dozen things simultaneously. The way his hand rested on the throne's arm, still on the surface, controlled underneath. The way he managed the weight of the room without appearing to manage anything at all. He was exhausted, she realized, not physically. The curse had broken, he was restored. But there was another kind of exhaustion, the kind that came from carrying something heavy for so long that you'd lost the ability to remember what your arms felt like without it. He's been doing this alone, she thought, for a very long time. And he expects to keep doing it. When the last petitioner withdrew, Caius stood. "Come," he said, not looking at her specifically. The invitation of someone who had forgotten how to issue invitations. "I'll show you the grounds." The gardens were magnificent, also deeply, specifically wrong in a way that took Ren a few minutes to identify. Every hedge trimmed to geometric perfection. Every flower bed arranged in patterns that probably carried centuries of symbolic meaning she didn't have the context for yet. Fountains that caught afternoon light and distributed it in calculated arcs. Beautiful. Controlled. The garden equivalent of a man who had forgotten how to make a mess. They walked in silence for a while. The bond between them hummed with the low, steady note of two things that were now connected and were both pretending not to know it. "You handled the court well," Caius said finally. Ren glanced at him. "You expected me to fail. I expected you to be frightened. I was frightened, I know." Something in his voice. Something that hadn't been there during the formal ceremony. I could sense it through the bond. "But you didn't show it." A pause that felt like something being acknowledged. "That takes a particular kind of discipline." He could sense it through the bond. She filed that away with everything else she was filing away. "I've had practice hiding fear," she said. "Poverty teaches you that faster than anything else. You don't survive on margins this thin by showing people where you're soft." Caius was quiet for a moment. They reached a bench beside a fountain, and he sat with the natural authority of someone who had sat on better. Gestured. She sat, leaving a careful foot of space between them. "Tell me about your life," he said. "Before the contract," Ren looked at him. "You read my file, I read statistics." His silver eyes were steady. "Patient. I don't know you. The distinction. The precision of it." She looked at the fountain. Water moving over stone, catching light. "Letting it go. My father left when I was 8, she said. My mother never explained why, and eventually I stopped expecting her to. We managed. She worked 2 jobs and I helped where I could. Then I was 24 and she got diagnosed." A pause. "Stage 4. The bills started arriving before I'd even processed what stage 4 meant. I dropped out of college to work full-time. It still wasn't enough." She paused again. "Water over stone. I was watching her die and I couldn't stop it. Couldn't even make it easier. When your lawyer showed up with that contract," she stopped. It felt like a lifeline even though it was insane. Maybe especially because it was insane. Sanity hadn't been getting me very far. Caius listened without interrupting. Without offering the reflexive sounds of sympathy that meant nothing. Without making it about him. He just listened, which was, Ren was discovering, rarer than it should have been. When she finished, he said, "Your mother. How much time does she have?" "The doctors said 6 weeks when we spoke. That was 3 weeks ago. Do you want to see her?" Ren's head came up. "You said I couldn't leave the grounds. I said you couldn't leave unsupervised." A pause. "I can take you tomorrow. We'll go to the hospital. You can tell her whatever you think is right." The offer hit somewhere she hadn't been protecting. "Why?" she asked. His expression shifted slightly. "Because contractual arrangements should still allow for basic human decency." A beat. "And because I know what it is to want more time with someone than you're going to get." Ren stared at him. He said that like it still hurts, she thought. After 1,000 years, he said that like it still hurts. "Thank you," she said quietly. "That means more than I can explain." The silence that followed was different, less careful. The kind that came after something real had been said, and both people were letting it settle before they touched it. "What was the curse?" Ren asked. "The original. How did it happen?" Caius's gaze went to the middle distance. Not the practice neutral of the throne room. Something older, private. The look of someone visiting a place they'd been avoiding. A mistake, he said. 1,000 years ago, I loved someone I shouldn't have, by the court's accounting anyway. A human woman. The court forbade the marriage, said it was an insult to our bloodline, said it would weaken everything we'd built. You married her anyway. I married her anyway. His jaw tightened, just slightly. The court's high priestess cursed me, said if I wanted a human bride so badly, I should sleep until another human agreed to marry me for mortal reasons. Not love, not magic, just survival. He looked at the water. Her name was Maren, my first wife. She died while I slept. Grew old in the 1st century after the curse took hold. I never got to say goodbye. I woke 100 years after she was gone to learn that she'd died alone. Ren felt the weight of that land, not as a story, as a fact. A thing that had happened to a real person sitting close enough to touch. I'm sorry, she said. He shrugged. But the gesture carried more grief in it than any amount of words. Is that why you made this contract marriage? Ren asked carefully. Because you won't risk. I made this marriage because I was tired of sleeping, quiet, final, no flourish, tired of waking in brief intervals to find everything changed. Buildings gone. Languages shifted. People I'd known for centuries. Gone while I dreamed. I wanted to be present. Even if it meant sharing my life with a stranger. He looked at her. Even if it couldn't be anything more than that, a beat. We don't have to be strangers, Ren said. Something crossed his face. Careful, considering. Like a door that had been locked for so long it wasn't certain it still knew how to open. No, he agreed slowly. I suppose we don't. The days found a rhythm. Mornings in the library. 3 stories of shelves packed with every language Ren recognized, and a dozen she didn't. She started with vampire law and history because she needed to understand the rules of the world she'd signed herself into. But she kept getting derailed, finding books on medieval astronomy, on the architecture of extinct civilizations, on languages that had no living speakers, on everything that a world running in parallel to the one she'd known had accumulated across the centuries. She was reading a treatise on star navigation when Caius found her on the 2nd morning. Sprawled in an armchair with 3 books open at once, and coffee going cold because she'd forgotten to drink it. He looked at the books, looked at her, said nothing. But he came back that evening, sat in the chair across the reading table, opened something of his own. Stayed until midnight without either of them saying a word, and somehow that was not uncomfortable at all. The 3rd evening he told her what she was actually looking at in the star navigation treatise. The 4th evening, she asked him questions she'd been holding. The 5th, they talked until 2 in the morning, and neither of them noticed. Not romance. Not yet. Something more fundamental than romance. 2 people remembering or learning for the first time. How to be honest in a room with another person. Afternoons were Lady Isadora's domain. Court etiquette. Forms of address. The hierarchy of the Nightborn houses, which was complicated enough to require actual diagrams, and a level of patience Ren was developing specifically for this purpose. The political implications of seating. The history behind every piece of jewelry she was expected to wear. I feel like I'm studying for a test I've already failed, Ren said on day 4. You haven't failed anything yet, Lady Isadora said with the patience of someone for whom decades were a reasonable unit of measurement. You spoke well to the court. Aldrich's challenge. What did Aldrich actually want? Ren asked, with that challenge. He wasn't just posturing. Lady Isadora paused. A fraction of a second. Long enough for Ren to notice, which meant it was intentional. He wants to understand the bond, she said carefully, to assess whether it can be influenced. Leveraged. She resumed arranging the diagrams on the table between them. Aldrich has served this court for 800 years. He believes stability is the supreme value. He has protected Caius fiercely, but he is also, another pause. Practical, Ren repeated. He will watch you, Lady Isadora said, and I would suggest you watch him in return. Day 9, the locked room. Ren had been thinking about it since her first night. The portrait facing the wall. The accumulated dust of however many years. The careful way Lady Isadora had redirected when Ren had almost asked about the East Wing. She went back. The lock was old, the kind that required a specific key she didn't have. But the latch was loose, and Ren had grown up in a house where nothing worked perfectly, and she had learned, by necessity, to coax stuck things into cooperation. The door opened. She slipped inside, dust, and the specific silence of a place that had been undisturbed long enough to develop its own atmosphere. A window shuttered against whatever light reached this corner of the house. a dressing table bearing objects that had not been moved in decades, a hairbrush, a glass bottle with perfume long since evaporated, a small jewelry box with the lid slightly open, and on the far wall, face turned to the plaster, a portrait in a frame that would have been considered grand in any museum, in any city. Ren crossed the room, lifted it, turned it around. A woman, painted with the kind of technical skill that belonged to an era when painting was the most precise form of record-keeping available. Pale, dark-haired, beautiful in a way that was specific rather than general, not the softened, idealized beauty of formal portraiture, but something more accurate, more like a person. And in the set of her jaw, the directness of her gaze, rendered in paint by someone who had clearly been instructed to make it accurate rather than flattering. Not soft, not decorative, someone who had been somewhere and done things and had opinions about both. Who are you? Ren thought. That is Isolde. Ren didn't drop the portrait. Barely. She turned. Lady Isidora stood in the doorway. I should have expected you'd find this room eventually, Lady Isidora said. Not accusatory. Something more complicated. Who is she? Lady Isidora came in, closed the door behind her, looked at the portrait for a long moment with an expression Ren was learning to identify as the face of someone who was deciding how much truth to give and in what order after Caius lost Marin, she said. He woke briefly, perhaps 100 years into the curse. The court was concerned. About succession, about stability, about what would happen to the Nightborn if their king never returned permanently. A pause. There was pressure to formalize an alternative arrangement. A vampire consort who could hold the court in the king's continued absence. They pressured him into a betrothal. Isolde was from one of the older houses. The arrangement was not romantic. It was political. Caius was barely conscious at the time. He agreed because the court needed stability, and he was in no position to argue effectively. And then the curse pulled him back under, a measured pause. And Isolde was engaged to a sleeping man for 200 years. Ren looked at the portrait, at the directness of that painted gaze, and then? 150 years ago, she disappeared. Lady Isidora's voice was level. She was there, and then she wasn't. No body was ever found. No message. No witnesses who admitted to seeing anything. A pause. Caius woke briefly 3 years after she vanished, learned she was gone. He has not spoken her name since. Ren looked at the portrait for a long moment. 200 years, she thought. Engaged to a sleeping man for 200 years, and then gone. Does he know I found this room? Not yet. Lady Isidora looked at her directly. That is a conversation that will need to happen. I would suggest you let him choose the moment. Ren set the portrait back against the wall. Face out this time, facing the room rather than the plaster. She followed Lady Isidora out without saying anything more, but she kept the image, the direct gaze. The set of a jaw that didn't look like someone who disappeared without reason. The face of someone who had made a decision rather than had one made for her. Where did you go, she thought, and why day 12? The hospital. Caius had arranged everything with the efficiency of someone for whom arranging things was a matter of will rather than logistics. The car, the route. His own glamour, the trick of it. He'd explained in the car with the patient brevity of someone explaining something that was second. Nature was not about changing what people saw but about adjusting what they paid attention to. Robin 407. Ruth Callahan looked smaller than she had 3 weeks ago. The cancer had done its arithmetic, done its relentless impersonal calculations. What it had left behind was a woman built of paper and determination and fierce brightness that some people carry right up to the moment they don't anymore. Baby girl, Ruth said. When Ren walked in, her voice was weaker. Her eyes were exactly the same. Ren crossed to the bed, took her mother's hand. The bones were close to the surface, fragile in a way that was new. Still, hi, Mom. A breath that was steadier than it had any right to be. I brought someone. Ruth's eyes moved past Ren, moved to Caius standing near the door, doing the thing he did, occupying space with complete precision, the glamour working, making him look not ordinary exactly, but human adjacent. Ruth looked at him the way mothers look at people their children have brought home. 4 seconds, full assessment. Complete. Are you good to her? Ruth asked, directly. No preamble. No courtesy first. Caius moved to the bedside. His voice, when he spoke, had lost its regal register entirely. Just a man answering a mother's question. I'm trying to be, he said. Your daughter is. She's remarkable, Mrs. Callahan. Stronger than she knows. I'm fortunate she agreed to the arrangement. Ruth looked at him for a long moment. "You love her," Ruth said. Not a question. Caius stopped, the glamour held. But something in his expression flickered. That careful, controlled face showing something it hadn't intended to show. The way a house shows light through a crack in the curtain. "It's complicated," he said carefully. "But I care for her welfare. She'll be protected. I promise you that. That's not what I asked." Ruth's voice was gentle, also absolute. The voice of a woman who had been getting to the truth of things for 60 years and wasn't about to start settling for adjacent answers now. "But it's enough for now." She looked at Ren. "Tell me everything." Ren sat on the edge of the bed, held her mother's hand, and told her the truth, because Ruth Callahan was dying, and Ren had decided somewhere on the drive over that her mother had earned accurate information about the person she was leaving her daughter with. All of it. The contract. The ceremony. The transformation in 20 days. The 1,000 years stretching out in front of her like a road she hadn't chosen, but had agreed to travel. Ruth listened without interrupting, which was unusual enough to register. When Ren finished, Ruth was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Well, that explains why he moves like water and his eyes catch light wrong." Ren stared at her. "I'm dying," Ruth said simply. "I've had a lot of time to notice things." She squeezed Ren's hand. "Are you safe?" "Yes, is he good to you?" Ren thought about the library, about the hospital visit being arranged without her asking, about the way he'd said, "I know what it is to lose a parent," and meant it across centuries of experience. "Yes," she said. "He is." Ruth's gaze moved to Caius, who had stepped back to give them space whilst remaining present. She studied him with those bright, precise eyes that had never once missed the thing they were looking for. Then she held out her free hand. Caius looked at it for a moment, then he crossed the room, took Ruth's hand in both of his, sat in the chair beside her. "Come here," Ruth said quietly, just to him. Ren looked away, gave them the moment. She heard her mother's voice, low and steady, saying something she couldn't make out. Heard Caius respond. Didn't try to hear the words. Some conversations were not meant to be overheard, even by the person they were about. When she looked back, something had shifted in Caius's expression. Something he was holding very carefully, the way people hold things that might shatter if they're not careful. They stayed 2 hours. Ruth drifted in and out of sleep, and each time she surfaced, her eyes found Ren first, with a look of relief and love so specific and accumulated that it made Ren's chest ache, with the knowledge that there was a finite number of times she was going to see it. Before they left, Ruth held Ren's face in her thin, familiar hands. "Baby girl?" Her voice was quieter now, but no less certain. "This isn't what I would have chosen for you. But you didn't choose it the way I would have, and that's all right." Her thumbs traced Ren's cheekbones with the patience of someone who has memorized a face and is verifying the memory. "What I see is someone who stopped running long enough to be found." A pause. "That man has been looking for something for a very long time. I think maybe he found it." "Let him, Mom. Let me finish, gentle. Absolute. You've carried everything for so long you've forgotten it's supposed to feel heavy. Let someone carry something with you. That's all I'm asking." In the car going home, Ren looked out the window. "What did she say to you?" she asked. "When I wasn't listening, Caius was quiet for a long moment. She told me not to waste the time I've been given. That she had raised her daughter to survive anything." A pause, and she asked me to promise her something. "What?" "That I would tell you something. At the right moment." "Not today," he stopped. She was very specific about not today. Ren turned from the window, looked at his profile, the precise jaw, the silver eyes on the road, the set of his shoulders that was different from what it had been before the hospital room. She got to him, Ren thought. A dying woman in a hospital bed got through to a vampire king in approximately 30 seconds. "Okay," Ren said. At the right moment, silence, then his hand on the seat between them. Ren looked at it, then she placed hers over it. He didn't move, didn't speak, but through the bond, she felt it. Warm and specific and unmistakable. Relief, his days 13 through 20. The evenings in the library grew longer. The conversations became more direct. The way conversations do when people stop performing and start actually talking. Caius told her about the vampire houses, the Northern Alliance, the Eastern factions, the Southern territories that had been submitting petitions for greater representation for 300 years and had been diplomatically deferred for the same amount of time. Ren pushed back where she thought he was wrong, which surprised him. Visibly, The first time, "You disagree with the isolation protocols," he said on day 16. "I think they were designed for a world that doesn't exist anymore," she said. "Keeping the houses completely separate work creates pressure. Pressure differentials create failures." She held his gaze. "You've been managing the containment of something that wants to expand. That's not stability. That's postponement." He was quiet for a moment. "You've been reading the Southern Houses petitions? Lady Isadora left them in my study. A beat. I don't think it was an accident." The corner of his mouth moved. "Barely." "No," he agreed. "Probably not. She thinks you should listen to them. She thinks many things." He looked at his book. "She is frequently right, and I am frequently slow to recognize it. That's very honest. I've had 1,000 years to work on honesty." His eyes came up to hers. Steady. "It's a slower process than you'd expect." Day 19, Lord Aldrich came to find her in the library, not at an assembly, not through official channels. In the late afternoon, when Caius was in council, Aldrich moved through the door like a man who had mapped the room before she was born. He sat across from her without being invited. Set a folder on the table between them. "Mrs. Vane, precisely courteous. I have information I believe you deserve to have." Ren set down her book. "What kind of information?" He opened the folder. Old script. She could read it now after Lady Isadora's drilling. He watched her find the clause, watched her read it twice. Should the cursed bond be broken by mortal vows, but the transformation not completed within a term of 3 years, the original curse reasserts in full. Sleep without end. "No second breaking. 3 years," she said. "You have 3 years to complete the transformation or the curse returns." His voice was measured. "You would transform automatically in 9 days." As planned. Unless something prevented that, he folded his hands on the table. "But there is another matter." He turned to the next document. "Isolde," he said. Ren kept her expression neutral. She was getting better at that. "She is alive," Aldrich said. "And she is making her way back to this court." Ren said nothing, waited. "Her disappearance was not voluntary," he continued. "There are factions in this court who have always believed that a vampire consort was preferable to a human one. Who believed that a betrothal, however politically arranged, carried legal weight under the old laws." A pause. "If Isolde returns and makes a formal claim before your transformation is complete, the bond could be contested. Is she making a claim?" "That I don't know." His eyes held hers steadily. "I'm telling you this because you deserve to understand the board before you're asked to play on it." He closed the folder, slid it toward her. "I am not your enemy, Mrs. Vane. My interests are stability. A court that doesn't fracture, and a human queen is an unstable variable. A human queen who completes her transformation is considerably less so." He stood. "I watched you in the throne room. What you said about mortality." A pause that contained something she couldn't fully read. "I thought Caius had made a mistake. I have revised that assessment." He moved toward the door. "Lord Aldrich," Ren said. He stopped. "What were you looking for?" "On day 1. You were looking for something specific." A pause. "I was looking for whether you could be frightened," he said. "People who can be frightened can be managed." He tilted his head slightly. "You couldn't be." Another pause. "That's rarer than you'd think." He left. Ren sat with the folder for a long time. Isolde, she thought. 200 years of waiting. And then gone. And now coming back. She didn't tell Caius that night. Not because she was hiding it. Because she was waiting. Waiting to understand what she actually thought before she brought it to someone else. Waiting to know whether Aldrich had given her a warning or a positioning tool, or both simultaneously, which seemed most likely. He said I couldn't be frightened, she thought. He should probably check his math on that. Day 22. Ren woke to her phone ringing. 4 Connor 47 in the morning. The hospital's number, she knew before she answered. She answered anyway. The drive was fast. Caius had been awake. She still didn't know when he slept, or whether he slept in any way that resembled what she meant by the word. And he was at her door before she'd finished the call. No questions, no performance of concern. Just the car in his hand at her back as they moved through the dark house. Room 407 was quiet in the specific way of rooms where something irreversible has recently happened. The night nurse met them in the corridor. She went peacefully, the nurse said. Her voice practiced and kind. About an hour ago. She was sleeping. Ren went in. Ruth Callahan looked smaller than she had on day 12, but also settled in a way that day 12 hadn't shown. The particular stillness of someone who has finally put down something very heavy and can rest. Ren sat beside her, took her mother's hand, still warm. The last of it. She didn't cry. She sat. She thought about 31 years. A woman who had worked 2 jobs without complaining. Who had made dinner on bad days and better dinner on worse ones. Who had taken a vampire's hand in a hospital room and in 30 seconds said the things that needed to be said. You met him, Ren said quietly. Not to the room. To her mother. To whatever part of Ruth was still present in the space that had held her for 3 weeks. You saw him clearly. You always did that. Saw people clearly. The door was open behind her. She heard Caius in the corridor. Not coming in. Staying where the space belonged to her first. She sat with Ruth for a long time. Long enough for the hospital to begin its morning shift changes. Long enough for the light outside to shift. When she finally stood and walked to the door, Caius was there. Leaning against the wall directly across the corridor, not pretending to be elsewhere. Just there. Silver eyes finding her in the dim early morning light. That careful, controlled expression wearing something it was trying hard not to show. She's gone. Ren said, I know, quietly. She was the only. She stopped, because grief doesn't need complete sentences. It just needs somewhere to land. She walked the 3 steps across the corridor, and Caius opened his arms. She cried then. The kind that doesn't have language. That comes from somewhere underneath words, from the part of a person that was formed before language was available. The hospital corridor was quiet around them. Caius held her without moving, without trying to make it stop. His hands steady, his presence through the bond, solid, anchored. The kind of there that didn't require any performance of itself. A long time, until the crying finished itself. She pulled back enough to see his face. Her hands against his chest, his hands light on her shoulders, his eyes careful and present. She said something to you, Ren said. In the hospital. The thing I couldn't hear, he was quiet. Tell me. The pause of a man deciding how much truth to give and deciding on all of it. She said you'd spent your whole life being the strong one. Carrying everything. Being the person who didn't fall apart because someone had to not fall apart. A pause. She said the kindest thing I could do was be strong enough that you didn't have to be. Sometimes the tears came back. Quiet this time, she was right, Ren said. She usually was, Caius said. And there was something in his voice. A softness that hadn't been there before the hospital room, before Ruth Callahan took his hand and said in 30 seconds what needed saying. That told Ren her mother had gotten there first, had seen it before anyone else had the words for it. Day 25, the funeral was small. Ren wore black. Caius stood beside her in the cemetery, and the glamour held for the handful of people who came. Nurses, Ruth's friends, the diner's owner who had driven 3 hours without being asked. They told stories about Ruth. About her laugh. About the way she made people feel like they were the most important person in any room she was in. Ren stood at the grave afterward. Caius a few steps back, giving her the space she needed first. I'm sorry I wasn't there, she said to the headstone. Margaret Ruth Callahan. She loved fiercely and completely. I'm sorry I was learning vampire law when you needed someone to hold your hand. I hope you understood why. I think you did. I think you always understood me better than I understood myself. She heard Caius move. He came to stand beside her, not taking her hand, not saying anything, just present, which was its own language. She told you not to waste the time, Ren said, without looking at him. Yes. She told me to let someone carry something with me. A pause. She had a gift, Caius said quietly, for saying the necessary thing. 30 years of practice. Ren looked at the headstone. 4 days, she said, until the transformation, until everything changes again, silence between them. But not uncomfortable. The kind of silence that comes after enough honest things have been said that silence can be trusted with the rest. Are you afraid? Caius asked. Ren thought about it. Not of the transformation, she said. Not of becoming. She paused. Not of that, then of what? She looked at him, at those silver eyes, at the face that had been lonely for so long it had become part of the structure, of how much I already trust you, she said. For someone who's still keeping something, his expression shifted. Small movement, but she caught it. He knows I know, she thought, about the room, about Isolde. He's known I know for a while. I owe you an explanation, he said. Yes, Ren said. You do. A pause. Not today? No, she agreed. Not today. She looked at the headstone one more time. But soon he nodded, and they stood there. The vampire king, and the woman who had married him for $20,000, and somewhere in 30 days, lost track of exactly when that had stopped being the whole story. Until the sun dropped below the tree line, and the first stars began appearing one by one. Then they walked back to the car together, 4 days. And Ren Callahan, who had signed a contract, buried her mother, found a locked room with a portrait that asked more questions than it answered, and learned to feel a second heartbeat like a compass she hadn't requested, was almost ready for what came next, almost. 4 days, that was what she had left of being exactly what she'd always been. A woman with her mother's hands in her memory, a diner's worth of calluses from years of carrying plates. 26 years of learning how to survive things that should have broken her but hadn't, which said something about either her constitution or her stubbornness, or both in proportions she'd never been able to determine after 4 days. Something else. Ren stood at the window of her rooms on day 26 and watched the grounds below. The manicured hedges, the fountains, the distant figures of court members moving through the gardens, with the unhurried ease of people who had nowhere specific to be for the next several centuries. 4 days, she thought. He thought. And then, there's still something I don't know, Isolde. Aldrich's careful words. The locked room and the portrait facing the wall until Ren had turned it back around. Let him choose the moment, Lady Isadora had said. The moment, Ren had decided, was now. She found him in the east study, alone, standing at a window with his back to the door, hands clasped behind him. The posture of someone who had been standing in exactly that position, thinking about exactly the same thing for quite some time. She came in, closed the door. He heard her. He always heard her, but he didn't turn immediately. You've known I know, she said. About Isolde. For how long? A pause. About 10 days. Why didn't you bring it up? He turned then, silver eyes finding her with that accuracy she'd gotten used to. Because every time I started to, something felt wrong about the timing. The context, a pause, which is a very elegant way of saying I was afraid. You keep saying that word. Ren crossed defensively. Just. Settled. You. A 1,000-year-old vampire king, afraid of specific things. His jaw tightened slightly. Yes. She sat down in the chair across from his desk, the posture of someone who wasn't going anywhere until this was finished. Tell me, she said. He told her all of it, after Merrin died, after he woke into a century that no longer contained her. The court had been relentless. A king without a consort was a court without an anchor. The old laws were specific about succession and stability and the requirements of a ruling line, and they did not make exceptions for grief. Isolde had been presented during one of the brief periods he'd surfaced from the curse's grip. A vampire of ancient lineage, intelligent, formidable in her own right. She had not wanted the arrangement any more than he had. We understood each other, Caius said, which is not the same as caring for each other, but it was honest in its way. We were both performing a function for the court, and we both knew it. He looked at the window. She never complained, never asked for more than the arrangement provided. She managed the court in my absences with remarkable precision and never once suggested I owed her something I hadn't offered. But you never told her about Merrin, Ren said. About why the curse existed. About what it had cost. No, his voice was even. That was mine to carry, so she spent 200 years engaged to a man who was emotionally somewhere else. Not because he didn't care, but because he never let her close enough to know whether he did or didn't. Caius was quiet for a moment. Yes, he said. That is accurate, and then she disappeared. 150 years ago, he turned from the window. Careful, very controlled. I woke 3 years after she vanished to learn she was gone. No body, no message, no witnesses, a long pause. I have carried the weight of that for 150 years. Not grief exactly. Responsibility without resolution. The specific discomfort of not knowing whether someone is gone by choice or by force, and not being able to do anything about either possibility. Ren thought about Aldrich's folder, about the clause in the Old Covenant, about forces in this court who have always believed a vampire consort was preferable. Caius, she said, I need to tell you something. She told him about Aldrich's visit, all of it. The documents, the 3-year clause, the information about Isolde returning. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, his expression had gone still in the way she recognized now. Not neutral, the opposite of neutral. A man holding something very carefully. He came to you directly, Caius said. And you didn't tell me for 6 days. I was trying to understand what I actually thought about it before I brought it to you. She held his gaze. I needed to know my own Red before I heard yours. Something shifted in his expression, the controlled stillness breaking open into something more honest. That is either very wise, he said, or a very precise description of not trusting me. It's both, Ren said. I'm working on the second part, silence, then, remarkably, he almost smiled. Not quite, but the edge of it, I owe you an apology, he said, for the locked room. For not explaining Isolde before you had to find her yourself. Yes, Ren agreed. You do. I'm sorry, she looked at him. At the man who had slept for 1,000 years and woken to find everything changed, who had lost one wife to time and failed another to distance, who had maintained a court for centuries while somehow still looking like a person who had been waiting for something he was no longer sure existed. I know, she said. I believe you. 3 days. 2-1. The last day Ren was fully human. She spent in the library. Not reading, just being there. In the smell of old paper, in the particular quality of afternoon light through high windows, in the chair that had become hers over 30 days of evenings. She thought about everything that had happened in this room. The conversations that had started as information exchange and become something else. The evenings that had stretched past midnight without either of them noticing the time going. The specific, irreplaceable experience of being genuinely known by another person. I'm going to miss this, she thought. Then. That doesn't make sense. I'll still be here, then. But I won't be this. Lady Isidora found her there in the late afternoon, sat across from her. Let the silence sit for a while before touching it. Are you frightened? She asked finally. Yes, Ren said, good. Lady Isidora's eyes were warm in a way they weren't always. Frightened people pay attention. Frightened people survive. A pause. You will survive this. How bad is it? The transformation. It is the worst pain you have ever experienced, Lady Isidora said, choosing precision over comfort, by a significant margin. And then it ends. A pause. And what you are afterward is worth what it cost to get there. I wouldn't say that if it weren't true. Ren nodded. One more thing, Lady Isidora said. Caius will ask if you want him to stay. Say yes. Ren looked at her. He won't ask for himself. Lady Isidora said, he'll ask because he thinks it's your right to choose. But he will need to be there, even if he doesn't say that in those words. A pause. He was with Marin when she was sick, in those last years, before the curse took him mid-sentence. He woke 100 years later to learn she had died alone. He has spent a very long time being somewhere else when it mattered most. Ren looked at her hands, at the moonstone ring, at the pale skin that was going to be fundamentally, permanently different in approximately 8 hours. I'll say yes, she said. The transformation room was deep in the house. Stone walls, heavy curtains, a bed and a chair, and the absolute silence of a space that had been prepared for exactly this and nothing else. And outside the door, she knew, because the bond told her before she'd finished the thought. Caius, waiting, he came in when she opened the door. No ceremony, no elaborate preparation, no performance of readiness from either of them. Just the two of them in a room with stone walls and the full moon beginning to assert itself through the shuttered window. He held a cup dark liquid, his blood. Freely given. He'd explained the difference 3 days ago. The difference between the transformation with the blood bond deepened and without it. With the bond, the connection became permanent. Absolute. The link between them woven into everything, across any distance, any darkness, any separation. Without the bond, the transformation still worked, still completed. But she would do it alone in the most fundamental sense of that word. She looked at the cup, looked at him. He asked, Are you sure? And she thought about everything, the contract, the hospice room, the moment his eyes opened and found her in the candlelit, dark with that accuracy that shouldn't have been possible. 30 days of libraries and honest conversations, and the specific feeling of being known by someone who had chosen to know her carefully. Ruth's thin hands on her face. Let someone carry something with you. She thought about Isolde's portrait, facing the wall in a room full of dust. I don't want to be that, she thought. I don't want to be the arrangement that couldn't be talked about, the thing he couldn't say out loud. But she had never once felt like that with him. Not in 30 days. Not for a single morning in that library. He had never made her feel like a function or a solution or a transaction after the transaction was made. He had made her feel like the person he was still learning how to talk to. Which was different. Which was everything. I'm sure, she said. She took the cup, looked at him over the rim. To whatever we're becoming, he held her gaze without flinching. To whatever we're becoming, she drank. The full moon rose. She felt it before she could have known to feel it. A string pulled taut in her chest, the bond going from its steady hum to something else entirely. Vibrating, resonant, alive in a new way, and then the pain began. Not a metaphor, not a literary description. Pain, actual, physical, specific pain. Her bones announced themselves one by one, starting with her hands moving up through her arms, her shoulders, her spine. Each nerve ending reporting in simultaneously, like a system running a process it wasn't designed to run at this speed. She went down onto the bed. Couldn't do anything else. Caius was there, his hands holding hers. Steady, not flinching when she gripped in ways that would have broken something human. His voice low and continuous in her ear. She couldn't always parse the words, but the sound of them was constant. The specific quality of someone who was not going anywhere and was not going to start. Don't go anywhere, she thought, or said. She couldn't tell. I'm here, he said. I'm not leaving. Time stopped being measurable. The pain went past the threshold where unconsciousness should have been available. Past the place where surrender felt like an option. Past everything she'd ever thought was the limit of what a person could survive. This is the price, she thought, somewhere in the middle of it. This is what it costs, and then, worth it. This is worth it. And then she stopped thinking in sentences. Caius never let go of her hands when the pain began to recede. Not gradually, in stages, like a tide going out in deliberate waves. Her senses arrived before the rest of her did. The stone walls in more detail than stone should have. The texture of the sheets beneath her, suddenly a complex map. The house breathing around her. Every beam and stone and window frame, and through the bond, Caius. Not just present the way he'd been present for 30 days. There, completely. A door opened between two rooms that had always been next to each other and had finally stopped pretending there wasn't a door. She could feel his relief. And underneath the relief, terror. The specific fear of someone who has watched the thing that matters most to them go through something terrible and is only, now, finally, beginning to breathe again. He was afraid the whole time, she thought. He held my hands for hours, and he was afraid the entire time, and he didn't say anything about it. She opened her eyes. The room was different. She was different. Both at once, the candlelight was precise now. Each flame a distinct temperature, a distinct color she could name exactly. The stone walls showed their composition. The dust in the air moved in visible currents. She looked at her hands, same hands, but steady in a way her hands had never been steady before. No tremor, no hesitation. Complete certainty in every movement she might make. Caius was watching her. She looked up, his face. Without any of the management she'd gotten used to over 30 days. Without the controlled, neutral expression. Without the careful distance. Just him. Relief and something larger than relief. Something that had been building for 30 days and was only now allowing itself to be visible. You're all right, he said. Not quite a statement. Not quite a question. Something between them. She sat up. The movement was effortless in a way that felt like someone had removed something she'd been carrying. So long she'd forgotten what it weighed. Different. I'm different. Yes, but it's still. She looked at her hands. At the ring. At herself. I'm still me. Yes, he said. You are. She looked at him. You were terrified. Yes, I felt it through the bond, I know. You could have told me, I know. Instead, you just held my hands for however many hours that was, and didn't say anything about being afraid. A pause. I didn't want to make it about me. Ren looked at him. She thought about Isolde. About 200 years of a man who kept his fear to himself and left a woman alone in the space that fear created. About 30 days of careful distance becoming something else. About a locked room and a portrait facing the wall. Caius, she said. Yes, I'm not going into the locked room. She held his gaze steadily. Whatever comes next. Whatever Aldrich is planning, whatever Isolde wants, whatever the court decides. I am not going to be the person in that portrait facing the wall. I refuse to be that, a pause. But that means you have to talk to me. When you're afraid. When something is happening that I need to know. Not in retrospect. With me. Not around me. He looked at her for a long time. I understand, he said. I mean it, I know. And something in his voice, a shift. The quality of a man agreeing to something larger than its words. I know you do. 2 hours later, the knock came. Caius opened the door. Lady Isadora stood in the corridor with her expression composed in the specific way that meant she was managing the presentation of something significant. "There is something you both need to know," she said. Isolde was at the gate, not demanding entry, not presenting herself with the authority of someone who had a legal claim to make. Standing at the edge of the property, alone in the dark, in the way of someone who has come a very long way and isn't certain of the reception waiting at the end of the journey. Ren and Caius came down together. Ren's new senses took her in immediately, fully, without effort. A woman. Ancient. Older than she looked, which was always true of vampires, but especially apparent here. Dark hair. And those eyes, the same directness she'd seen in the portrait. The gaze of someone who had spent 150 years in conditions that required looking at everything without flinching, and had come through that with the ability intact. She was exhausted. The deep, structural exhaustion of someone who had been moving for a very long time and had only just stopped. Thin, worn, her clothes wrong for the season in a way that suggested she had traveled without the luxury of planning. She looked at Caius first. "I'm not here to make a claim," she said. Her voice was low, careful, each word chosen with the knowledge that the wrong one could end this before it needed to end. "I need you to know that before anything else. I'm not here for that." Her eyes moved to Ren. Quick, precise assessment, not unkind. "You must be her," Ren said. Isolde. A pause. "I know. You found my portrait. You were facing the wall. I noticed someone had turned it back, the edge of something that might have been a smile, in different circumstances. I wasn't sure whether to take that as a good sign." Caius said. "Why are you here?" Isolde looked at him. Something passed through her expression, 150 years of something, compressed into a single moment and then released. "Because of Aldrich," she said. Caius went still beside Ren. Not the controlled stillness. "The actual kind. He's the reason you left," Caius said. "He's the reason I had to." Her jaw was tight. "He came to me 150 years ago. Told me there were factions in the court who would use me as a mechanism to control your decisions. That they would use the betrothal's legal standing to force succession in a direction they preferred. He gave me a choice. Leave quietly or watch the court fracture around the attempt." A pause. "He framed it as protecting me." Her eyes were steady. "It took me approximately 30 years to understand that he wasn't protecting me. He was removing a variable that had become inconvenient." Caius was very still. "He wanted me in position," he said slowly. "Controllable. Without a consort who had independent standing from which to operate." "Yes." Isolde looked at Ren. "He did the same thing to me that he's been doing to you. Building a picture from partial truths. Making himself appear to be the honest voice in a room full of politics." A pause. "He's not dishonest, exactly. That's what makes him effective. Everything he tells you is true. It's what he leaves out that does the work." Ren thought about Aldrich's folder. "About 'I am not your enemy, Mrs. Vane.' True, technically, operationally. But not complete. He told me you might make a claim," Ren said. "Under the old laws. The betrothal, he told you that to make you uncertain. An uncertain queen is a queen he can work with." Isolde's gaze was direct. "He's been planning this since before you arrived. The third-party petition mechanism in the Covenant law. If a recognized court member files the right documentation, they can request formal oversight of the blood bond. Legal standing to involve themselves in decisions made through the bond." She looked at Ren. "He will file that petition 3 days from now. Before the first full assembly after your transformation, and I'm the only person who can stop it," Ren said. "Yes. The petition can be blocked by a formal rebuttal from the consort. Presented to the full assembly. It has to be you. A king defending his own bond looks self-serving. It has to come from the consort, and it has to demonstrate independent standing." A pause. "Evidence that you are not a variable, not a leverage point. A principal with your own authority. What kind of evidence?" Isolde reached into her coat, produced a folder that was older than Aldrich's. The formal written hand that Ren could now read. "I've been collecting this for 150 years, Isolde said. "Every instance of Aldrich invoking the third-party petition mechanism. Every case where he positioned himself as the necessary intermediary. Every ruling he influenced through that position." She held the folder out. "I couldn't use it myself. I had no standing after I left. But I kept the records." Her eyes were steady. "I've been waiting for someone who could use them." Ren took the folder, looked at it, looked at Isolde. "You came back for this," she said. "Not for Caius. Not to make any claim. You came back to hand this to someone who could finish what you couldn't. Isolde was quiet for a moment. I came back, she said, because a woman I'd never met turned my portrait back around. A pause. It seemed like the kind of gesture that deserved a reciprocal one. 3 days. Ren spent them in the library, not reading for pleasure, working. The material in Isolde's folder was dense and specific and exactly calibrated to what she needed. Cases going back 4 centuries. Patterns visible only when you could see all of them together. The specific legal language of the third-party petition mechanism and exactly where its vulnerabilities were located. Lady Isadora sat with her for hours each day, explaining context, filling in names, tracing the threads that connected decades of quiet, patient manipulation. Caius came and went. Gave her space to work without disappearing entirely. She felt him through the bond. Present, available, close enough to find in an instant. Not hovering, not managing. Just there in the background the way someone should be when you're doing something important and they trust you to do it. He's getting it, she thought, on the second day. What with me looks like instead of around me. Isolde stayed in the West Wing and talked with Ren in the evenings. Not with warmth, they were too new for warmth. But with honesty, which was worth more. Does it bother you? Ren asked on the second evening. Being here. Seeing him with someone, Isolde considered the question with the seriousness she gave everything. It bothered me, she said, for roughly the first 40 years of our arrangement. I had hoped for something that never materialized, a pause. After that I accepted what it was. After that it stopped hurting, she looked at Ren. Watching him now doesn't hurt. It's the opposite, a pause. He looks like someone who has put something down. Something he's been carrying for a very long time. He does, Ren agreed. Don't let him pick it back up, Isolde said. Her eyes were steady. He'll want to. When things get hard, he'll want to retreat into being a king instead of a person. He's very practiced at that retreat, a pause. Don't let him. I won't, Ren said, and meant it completely. The assembly, 3 days after the transformation. Ren stood in front of a mirror and met her own eyes. The same eyes, but with something new at the edges. A silver ring around the iris, faint, clear, unmistakable. Lady Isadora had dressed her in deep blue, silver at the throat. No circlet, she didn't need the marker. She was coming in as herself. The throne room was full in a way that felt different from her first day. Every house. Every faction. The specific atmospheric pressure of a room that knows something significant is about to happen and has arranged itself to witness it. Aldrich stood before the dais, his petition documents in hand. The posture of a man who had done this before and knew precisely how it went. Ren entered through the side door. The murmur that moved through the room had a different quality than the murmur of her first day. Not who is she anymore. Not can she survive us. Something more like, she's here. She actually came. Aldrich saw her. His expression didn't change. But his hands, she watched his hands. No longer perfectly still. A small involuntary adjustment. The body of a man whose scenario had introduced an unexpected variable he hadn't fully accounted for. She crossed the floor directly. To the center. The place where petitioners stood, Lord Aldrich. She said. He inclined his head. Perfectly courteous, as always. Mrs. Vane, I understand you have a petition to file. I do. He held up the documents. Under the third-party oversight clause of the Covenant Law. I know which clause, Ren said. I've spent 3 days reading every instance in which that clause has been invoked. She opened her own folder. Going back 412 years. The room went very quiet. I have a formal rebuttal, Ren said. Per the old laws. Presented by the consort to the full assembly, Aldrich's expression was unchanged, but his hands were not still. That small adjustment again. The recalculation of a man who had prepared for several scenarios and was identifying which one he was actually in. You are within your rights to submit a rebuttal, he said. Though I would note that new consorts rarely, the third-party oversight clause was invoked in 1743, Ren said, against Lord Casmer and his consort. You filed that petition. It passed. Lord Casmer's decisions regarding the Eastern Trade Agreement were reviewed and modified, with your involvement as the adjudicating party. She looked at him steadily. In 1798, you filed against the Vane Court's Southern representative. That petition passed. The Southern House's appeal for greater representation was delayed by approximately 60 years. As a direct result, a pause. In 1871, you filed a preliminary petition against Lord Vane himself. which was withdrawn when Isolde's disappearance removed the mechanism's legal standing, the room held its breath. I have documentation, Ren said, for all 17 instances in which this clause has been invoked in the last 4 centuries. 12 of them filed by you or through your direct advocacy. She looked at the assembled court. The third-party oversight clause was written to protect consorts from coercive bonds. From arrangements entered without genuine consent, she looked back at Aldrich. It was not written to allow a third party to institutionalize themselves as the permanent intermediary between a king and his wife, between a person and their bond, between someone and the relationship that is, by the old laws and by every law that actually matters, their own. Aldrich looked at her, for the first time in everything Ren had observed of him. Not assessing, not calibrating. Something else. This expression of a very old man confronting something he hadn't expected to have to confront. You have been thorough, he said. I grew up with nothing, Ren said. The only advantage I could reliably create was knowing more than the other person expected me to know. It's a habit. A pause. Where did you get the historical documentation? He asked, quietly. Just to her, from someone you underestimated, Ren said. 150 years ago. Something moved through Aldrich's expression. Complex. Not defeat exactly. The reconfiguration of a man confronting the long-running consequence of a decision he'd made when the world was arranged differently. He looked at her for a long moment, then he set his petition documents face down on the floor. Not a surrender. Aldrich did not do surrender, but an acknowledgement. The precise acknowledgement of a man who had been outmaneuvered and was honest enough, at 800 years old, to recognize it and say so with the clarity of a gesture rather than a word. The petition is withdrawn, he said, to the full assembly, formal, final, leaving no room for interpretation. The sound that moved through the court was something Ren didn't have the vocabulary for yet. She was going to have 1,000 years to learn the vocabulary. She was starting now. Caius descended from the dais, crossed the floor, stood beside her. His silver eyes swept the room once with the look of a king who had just watched his court receive information that would take years to fully integrate, and then he looked at her. And through the bond, not relief, not pride exactly. Something quieter than both of those things. She did that herself, that something said. And I was here. Afterward, the court dispersed into its carefully managed chaos. Lady Isadora directed the flow with the efficiency of someone who had been managing exactly this kind of aftermath for longer than most countries had been countries. Isolde found Ren in the corridor, wearing her traveling coat, the bag at her feet. You're leaving, Ren said. I have things to settle. Isolde's eyes were steady. I've been in motion for 150 years. There are places to return to. Things to resolve. A pause. This isn't my court anymore. It wasn't comfortable when it was. She looked at Ren with a directness that had probably unnerved several centuries of people. But this is your court, and you are not what I expected. What did you expect? Someone who needed saving. A pause. Genuine warmth, Ren thought. Maybe for the first time between them. Someone who married a dying king and hoped for the best. I married a dying king for $20,000, Ren said. Yes. Isolde tilted her head slightly. And then you turned my portrait around. And spent 30 days learning everything you could. And showed up to the assembly with 400 years of documentation 1 week after becoming a vampire. A pause. That's not hoping for the best. That's someone who decided to be the best option available. She extended her hand. Ren took it. Isolde's grip was firm, brief. The handshake of someone who did not make gestures they didn't mean. Take care of him, Isolde said. He's better than he thinks he is. He just needed someone to not rescue him, Ren said. No, Isolde's eyes were clear and settled. Just stay. She picked up her bag, walked toward the door, paused without turning. The portrait, she said. You can take it down if you want. I think I'll leave it, Ren said. It's good work, and this time, Isolde's smile was complete. The library. 3 a.m, when Ren had observed. The honest conversations happened in this house. Caius on the sofa, Ren in the chair that had been hers for 30 days and would be hers for considerably longer, the fire burning. The bond between them quiet and warm and full of things that didn't need to be said immediately. You owe me an explanation, Ren said. He looked at her. Not Isolde, she said. I understand Isolde now. She paused. You said you chose me because you saw someone who understood sacrifice. Someone who would make the impossible choice. She held his gaze. But you knew the court would resist. You knew Aldrich would find a mechanism. You knew something like this assembly was coming. A pause. You chose me partly because you thought I could navigate it. He was quiet for a moment. Yes, he said. I knew the court would resist. I knew Aldrich would move. I chose you because I saw someone who had survived 26 years of impossible situations and was still standing. Still kind. Still capable of that. He looked at his hands. I thought if anyone could navigate what was coming, it was someone who had never had the option of failing gracefully. You chose me as a strategy. I chose you, he said, because the strategy and the person happened to be the same. He looked up. And then you became considerably more than either, which I had not anticipated, and which I am, a pause, grateful for. Specifically and genuinely grateful for. Ren looked at him. That's very honest. I'm working on it. The almost smile. It's a slower process than you'd expect. Silence. The good kind. The kind that doesn't need filling, Caius, she said. Yes, I'm going to be here for 1,000 years. Yes, that means you have to keep working on it. I know. Every time you want to retreat into being a king instead of a person. I know. I'm going to notice. I know. He held her gaze. I'm counting on it. She looked at him. At the silver eyes that had found her in a candle-lit room across the altar with an accuracy that had nothing to do with looking around first. At the face that had been lonely for so long the loneliness had become part of the structure, which was changing now. Slowly, in small ways that compounded. The almost smile appearing more reliably. The controlled, neutral expression slipping more often into something honest. The careful distance becoming something chosen rather than defaulted. The difference between a wall and a door. Ruth told you something in the hospital, Ren said. That you were supposed to tell me at the right moment? He went still then. Yes, is this the right moment? He looked at her for a long time. The kind of look that takes in everything available and decides to be honest about what it sees. She said, his voice was quiet, level. But underneath the level, something real. She said you had spent your whole life being the person who didn't need anything. Because needing things was a liability you couldn't afford. Because every time you had needed something, it had either been used against you or simply hadn't come. A pause. She said the kindest thing anyone could do for you was to show up. Reliably. Without agenda. To be there before you asked and still there after you stopped asking. His eyes held hers. She said you had been alone in the specific way that comes from being surrounded by need you couldn't meet. And that what you needed most was someone who needed nothing from you except your presence. Ren's throat tightened, she said. He paused, looked at his hands, then back at her. The most honest look she'd received from him across all 30 days. She said to tell you, you're allowed to just be here. You don't have to save anything. You don't have to prove anything. You don't have to carry it. A pause. She said you'd know what that meant. Ren knew exactly what that meant. She sat with it, with the weight of her mother's voice in a borrowed hospital room. With 30 years of carry this, hold this, manage this, keep this together, and the exhaustion that lived underneath all of it, so deep and so constant she'd stopped knowing it was there. You're allowed to just be here. She was right, Ren said, her voice steady. Barely. She usually was, Caius said. The same words he'd said in the hospital corridor. A different weight to them now. I liked her very much. She liked you too. Ren looked at him, which surprised me. She was usually a better judge of people than that. The almost smile became, for the first time, the actual thing, not large, not performed, not constructed for any audience, just real. Caius Vane. Ancient vampire king, lord of the Nightborn court. Smiling because a woman who had grown up counting every dollar had just insulted him with affection at 3 a.m. There you are, Ren thought. I wondered when I'd actually meet you. Come here, she said. He crossed to her chair. She stood, close enough. She put her hands on either side of his face, the way Ruth had held hers in room 407, that specific gesture. I see you, I'm here. This is real. He went very still under her hands. The stillness of someone receiving something they had not expected and were not certain they knew how to receive. I'm not going anywhere, she said. He covered her hands with his. Cool and steady, I know, he said. But you needed to hear it. A pause. Yes, she looked at him. 995 years left. What do you want to do with them? Something opened in his expression. Something that had been closed for a very long time and was choosing, deliberately, finally, to open. Everything, he said. With you. Everything available. 5 years later, The cemetery on the outskirts of the city was quiet in early evening. The kind of quiet that settled over places like this as the day's visitors left and the night came in to take their place. Ren set white flowers on the grave. Ruth had liked white ones. Said they didn't apologize for being there. Margaret Ruth Callahan. She loved fiercely and completely. True. Every word. Truer the more time passed. Caius stood a few steps behind her. The distance of someone who understood that this moment belonged to her first and to them second, and was not in any hurry for that order to change. She stood for a while, thought about 5 years. The court slowly adjusting to a queen who pushed back. The library evenings that had never stopped being the best part of any given week. The ongoing, daily project of watching Caius Vane remember how to be a person instead of a position. 2 steps forward, 1 step back, but the direction consistent. The specific and unrepeatable experience of being genuinely known by someone who had chosen to know her carefully and kept choosing it. "I'm not wasting it, Mom," Ren said. To the headstone, to wherever Ruth was. "I promise," she heard Caius move. He came to stand beside her, their shoulders almost touching, the bond between them, 5 years settled now, deep and certain and ordinary in the best possible way. The way breathing was ordinary. "What did she say to you?" Ren asked. "The rest of it. The part I still don't know all of." He was quiet for a moment. The pause of a man who still gave the most important sentences the time they deserved. "She said she had watched you spend your whole life making yourself smaller," he said. "Easier, taking up less space so there would be room for everything else that needed space." He looked at the headstone, she said. "Make sure she knows she's allowed to be large, to take up the room, to be all of what she is." A pause. "She said you had been practicing being small for so long you'd forgotten it was a practice." Ren looked at the words cut into stone. "She loved fiercely and completely." "She always said the necessary thing," Ren said. "Yes," Caius said. "She did." Ren turned to him. 5 years. Still, the precision of those silver eyes. The face that had been lonely for long enough that the loneliness had become architectural. Changed now. Not less precise. Inhabited differently. The way a house changes when someone actually lives in it, rather than maintains it. 995 years, she said. "Give or take. We're going to need more bookshelves. I'll have them built. And you're going to have to stop running every assembly like a military campaign." "I will consider it, Caius." I said I would consider it. "That means no." "It means..." The real smile. 5 years old and still surprising her every time she saw it, in the best possible way. "It means I will consider it with complete seriousness and then very likely continue with operational efficiency, because the alternative is chaos, and I have witnessed what vampire court chaos actually looks like. And I find that I prefer the military campaign." Ren laughed. The sound of it went out into the cemetery evening, past the headstones and the old trees, and the first stars coming in at the edges of the sky. Caius looked at her when she laughed. The way he always looked at her when she laughed. Like it was specific. Like it was the particular thing he'd been listening for and was relieved to hear again. She put her hand in his. He held it. They stood in the evening light. The headstone before them, the sky going from blue to something deeper. The first stars committing to their positions. Ruth Callahan had spent her life taking care of the people she loved. Had worked 2 jobs and made dinner and held things together with no drama and asked nothing in return except the chance to do it again tomorrow. Had met a vampire king in a hospital room and taken his hand and said what needed to be said in approximately 30 seconds. Had raised a daughter who signed impossible contracts for the right reasons and turned portraits back around and showed up to ancient assemblies with 400 years of documentation 1 week after becoming something she hadn't been before. You're allowed to just be here. Ren was here, 995 years to go. She looked at the stars coming in, one by one, each one committing to its position for the night. I'm going to use every single one of them, she thought, Caius's hand in hers. Steady. Present, the bond between them humming its quiet certain note, the same note it had been humming since that midnight ceremony in a hospice room that had been wrong in all the right ways. Ready, he said. She looked at the headstone one last time. She loved fiercely and completely. Yes, Ren said, and they walked back through the evening together. The vampire king and the woman who had married him for $20,000 and stayed for every reason that mattered and would keep finding new reasons for the next 995 years. The stars. came out. The night was long, and neither of them was going anywhere.